American soldiers are dead. 2 United States Army soldiers dead, killed at a base in Jordan because Iran decided to test Donald Trump. And Donald Trump said, and I am quoting him directly, Iran will pay, quote, many times over. Now, I want you to sit with that for just a moment. I want you to actually think about what that means and what it means that we are back here again, back at this particular crossroads, and why we're here, and who put us here. Because this story, my friends, this is the story today. Not the World Cup, though we'll get to that. Not the new British Prime Minister, though we will absolutely get to that. But this, American blood on foreign soil, this is what leads. Iran violated the peace agreement, the agreement that was holding, the agreement that was working, and they killed 2 of ours to prove a point or to send a message, or because somebody in Tehran made a calculation. And that calculation, I suspect, is about to be revised. I'm Rick LeBeau. This is Rush Hour, and we are just getting started. Let me set the scene for you, because the drive-by media is not going to do it properly. 2 soldiers, Army soldiers. They had names. They had families. They were stationed at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, which is a base the United States uses to project stability, their word, not mine, though I agree with it, into one of the most volatile neighborhoods on the planet. And last week, Iran backed forces, and let us not be coy about this. Let us not dance around it the way our friends in the press love to do. Iran backed forces launched an attack on that base and killed them. Now, the Trump administration struck a peace arrangement with Iran. You may recall, the media told you it was reckless, that Trump was blundering around in the Middle East like a bull in a china shop, that he didn't understand the geopolitical complexity. And I love that phrase, geopolitical complexity. It is the phrase diplomats use when they want to do nothing and sound smart while doing it. But the arrangement was holding. Things were quieter. And then Iran blinked, or more accurately, Iran flinched. And when Iran flinches, they tend to flinch forward, which is their way. They probe, they test, they send a proxy to do something terrible, and then they wait to see what happens. This is the Iranian playbook, and it has been the Iranian playbook since 1979. Some things do not change. Under Barack Obama, Barry, as I used to call him, our friend from Chicago, the playbook worked beautifully for them. You'd get an attack, you'd get a strongly worded statement from the State Department, maybe some sanctions that would quietly get waived 6 months later, and Iran would pocket the win and move on to the next thing. Under Obama, they got billions of dollars in cash, flown over on pallets in the dead of night like some kind of international room service. And what did they do with it? They funded every militia and every proxy and every terrorist outfit from Beirut to Baghdad. Everybody knew it. The Obama people knew it, and they did it anyway. You want to understand why we are back in this position? That's why. Because the lesson that was taught in those years, the lesson that was absorbed in Tehran, is that America, under certain kinds of leadership, will pay you for bad behavior, will reward you for bad behavior, and old habits, as they say, die hard. Now, Donald Trump is not Barry Obama. That much is settled law at this point. Trump said Iran will pay many times over. That is not diplomatic boilerplate. That is not a strongly worded letter. That is a man who has demonstrated repeatedly that he means what he says and says what he means. Soleimani can no longer testify on the subject, but the lesson was well learned. So, the question now is, what does many times over look like? And that is a question I will not pretend to answer, because I don't know, and anyone who tells you they know is guessing. But I will tell you this: the Iranians know Trump. They've dealt with Trump before. They know the difference between an administration that sends pallets of cash and an administration that sends a Reaper drone. And they are, right now, doing that very particular kind of math. Gas prices, by the way, and I mention this not to alarm you, but because it is directly connected, gas prices have ticked back above $4 a gallon this morning, for the first time since mid-June. Middle East fighting, oil markets, $4 a gallon. Draw the line. The drive-by media will not draw that line for you, because drawing that line would require them to acknowledge that instability in the region has real consequences for real Americans filling up their tanks, and that would complicate the narrative they want to run about foreign policy being some kind of abstract academic exercise. It is not an abstract academic exercise. It costs you money at the pump. It costs you, potentially, sons and daughters in uniform. These things are connected, and the American people deserve to have that connection made clearly and without apology now. The media coverage of this has been, and I say this without a shred of surprise, deeply revealing. 2 American soldiers are dead. And I've seen more column inches today about the World Cup and some New York City mayor's social media controversy than I have about these 2 men and what happened to them. That tells you everything you need to know about where the priorities of our press corps currently reside. 2 soldiers killed by Iran, and it's fighting for space below the fold. We know what it looks like when the media decides a story is important. You can't miss it. Wall-to-wall coverage, chyrons running 24 hours, every anchor with that particular gravity face they put on. You know the face. Grave, concerned, urgent. We have all seen it. We saw it for years, every time there was the faintest whiff of a Russia story. We saw it every time somebody mean tweeted at a congresswoman. 2 soldiers killed by Iranian proxies? The face is somewhere between muted and absent. I'll tell you why. Because this story does not fit the framework. The framework, and this is the framework our friends in the press have been running for years now, is that confronting Iran is dangerous and reckless, that diplomacy is always the answer, that military deterrence is some kind of cowboy fantasy. If you accept that framework, then 2 soldiers killed at a base in Jordan is an uncomfortable data point because it suggests that the absence of deterrence is what got them killed. The absence of deterrence. When you signal to a regime that aggression carries no real cost, they will keep being aggressive. This is not complicated. This is not some grand strategic insight. This is how the world works. It is how it has always worked, and yet somehow, every generation of State Department careerists manages to discover the idea of appeasing Iran as though it were a new and sophisticated concept, and then they are shocked when Iran does exactly what aggressive regimes always do. I hope the families of these 2 soldiers understand that there are Americans, many, many millions of Americans, who are angry about this, who are paying attention, who will not let this get buried under soccer scores and Twitter controversies. These men serve their country, and they deserve better than to be a footnote, and Iran will pay, many times over. Don't doubt me on that. All right, the roundup. And we have got a full plate today, folks, so strap in. First, New York City. A man named Andrew Arabaka has been named as the suspect in what is being called an incendiary device attack on 26 Federal Plaza, which, for those of you not from New York, is where federal agencies, including ICE, operate out of. And this gentleman, when apprehended, allegedly had anti-ICE materials on him. Well, imagine my surprise. Folks, Secretary Rubio just released a report, 99 pages, on how Cuba has spent decades cultivating revolutionary movements inside the United States. And separately, the National Review crowd has been pointing out that there is a serious lack of vigilance when it comes to political violence emanating from the left. And I want to connect those dots for you, because the drive-by media certainly isn't going to. We have spent the better part of 5 years watching the left construct an ideological framework in which federal immigration enforcement is literally fascism, in which the men and women who work for ICE are comparable to, and I have heard this with my own ears, stormtroopers and concentration camp guards and all the rest of it. Democratic candidates have run on abolishing ICE. Elected officials have called for resistance to federal law enforcement. And then, someone shows up with an incendiary device outside a federal building with anti-ICE literature on his person, and somehow we're supposed to treat this as a mystery, as something disconnected from the rhetoric? No candidate talks about abolishing the FBI. No candidate talks about abolishing the Secret Service. Nobody runs on abolishing the DEA. But ICE? ICE gets the full Alinsky treatment, and anyone who objects is a nativist. Tom Homan, the border czar, said last Sunday that ICE has arrested nearly 6,500 criminal illegal immigrants in New York City alone since Trump took office. 6,500 criminals, off the street, gone. And someone is out here throwing incendiary devices at the people doing that job. This is left-wing terrorism, and it should be called that, without hesitation, without equivocation. The same people who would spend 6 months covering a broken window if the breaker held a MAGA hat are going to do their level best to make this story disappear. Don't let them. Now, over to Britain. Oh, Britain. So Keir Starmer, who I always found to be a man uniquely suited to making nothing seem both boring and ominous simultaneously, has resigned less than 2.5 years into his prime ministership. And who steps into the breach? Andy Burnham! Now, for those of you who are not deep students of British political theater, and I understand you have a life, Andy Burnham was the mayor of Manchester, fancied himself something of a northern man-of-the-people populist, and has now pivoted to being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. They're calling him the King of the North over there, which sounds like a Game of Thrones character, and based on his economic policies, the comparison may be apt, specifically in the sense that things tend to go badly for the Starks. The National Review is already pointing out that Burnham has an inexplicable nostalgia for the business-killing policies of the 1970s. The 1970s, folks. In Britain, the 1970s means the 3-day work week, rubbish piling up in the streets, and a general air of managed decline that made Margaret Thatcher look like a founding father by comparison. Britain has been to where Burnham apparently wants to take them, and they didn't like it. He's announced a 10-year plan to fix the country. 10 years. They always have a plan. The socialists always have a plan, and the plan is always a decade long, because that way whoever wrote the plan will be safely out of office before anyone can measure the results and come looking for them. The Trump administration, to their credit, has already told Burnham exactly what America expects. Invest in your defense commitments, specifically the nuclear submarines being built under the AUKUS arrangement with the U.S. and Australia, and drill for your own energy. Simple, clear, sensible. Whether Burnham listens is another question. He's a socialist who just took power. The odds that his first instinct is, let's drill for oil, are roughly the same as the odds that Bella Pelosi shows up to a tax cut signing ceremony. Good luck to the British people. They're going to need it. And finally, and I will be brief, because this is a quick one, but it's worth noting, the Sinaloa cartel co-founder, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, was sentenced to life in federal prison on Monday and agreed to forfeit $15 billion, with a B. $15 billion that this man made running one of the most destructive drug trafficking organizations in the history of the Western Hemisphere. $15 billion. You want to understand why the border matters. You want to understand why the cartels are not a local Mexican law enforcement problem, but an American national security problem. $15 billion, 5 decades of operation, and a river of fentanyl and misery that has killed tens of thousands of Americans. This man is going to die in an American federal prison, and I will confess to you that I have very little sympathy to spare for him. The work is not done. The cartel does not dissolve because the co-founder goes to prison. But this is a win, and it is the direct result of having a Justice Department and an administration that takes the cartels seriously, which is the minimum we should expect, and somehow not what we always get. Good, life in prison. Next. My friends, we have covered some ground today. 2 American soldiers gone. Iranian proxies making a bet that they'll get away with it. A man with an incendiary device and anti-ICE literature outside a federal building in New York, while 6,500 criminals are being pulled off the streets of that same city. A new British socialist prime minister announcing a plan to fix Britain by doing what broke Britain the last time. And a cartel kingpin headed to a cell he will never leave. What's the through line? I'll tell you what it is. Consequences. Whether consequences exist or whether they don't. Whether the people in power believe that actions should have consequences or whether they believe that the right speech and the right politics and the right connections should insulate you from them. Trump told Iran there will be consequences. ICE is delivering consequences to people who came here illegally and chose to commit crimes on top of it. El Mayo is living inside a set of consequences right now that he will live inside until he assumes room temperature, as we say. The people who want to abolish ICE, the people who ran interference for Iran for a decade, the people who think that a 10-year socialist plan is going to fix Britain. What they all share is a fundamental allergy to the idea that the world is shaped by reality, not by good intentions. And the rest of us, the people who make the country work, the people who fill up the tank and go to the job and follow the rules, we are the ones who pay the price when they're wrong, as we always are. Look, I have been behind this microphone for a long time, and I will tell you, and I say this with all the modesty I can muster, which, as you know, is not much. I have seen this particular movie before, many times. It always ends the same way. Reality wins. Common sense, abused and mocked and sneered at, eventually wins. America, written off and counted out and eulogized every other decade, wins. That does not mean it's automatic. That does not mean you sit back and let it happen. It means you pay attention, you stay engaged, you don't let them bury the stories that need to stay alive, and you show up. These 2 soldiers showed up. They deserve to be remembered. I'm Rick LeBeau. This has been Rush Hour. Same time tomorrow if they let us back on.